Day 5 to 10:26 a.m. Parking area, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Feeling the weight and the soft sensation that suddenly pressed on his back, Mark struggled hard not to fall towards the girl he had just finished experimenting on. Due to that, he had fallen sidewards, avoiding the little girl. When he fell, Mark felt a little pain on his right arm and right side as it hit the floor. It was then he felt a tight grasp on his left arm as it was pulled away. Following that, his back shivered and he felt the hair of his neck, back and arms stood on ends. He could also feel a soft and sticky sensation repeatedly touching his left arm that was pulled away. As he recovered from the sudden fall, he looked at his left arm that was voraciously being licked like an ice cream. And the culprit, of course, was no other than Jeanette, who was left inside the vehicle all this time. Jeanette was tightly hugging his arm and licking the remaining blood away. Seeing this sight, Mark felt exasperated. It was not like he was too immersed in what he was doing, but he felt no ill intent from Jeanette nor felt any danger in the surroundings. It just meant that Jeanette did not attack her but only wanted to lick off the blood that covered his arm after he sliced his skin twice. If there was really any danger, his enhanced senses should feel it, but as there was none, he was caught off guard. Still, the feeling of your arm being licked by a woman was rather. As he started to feel somewhat weird and awkward, Mark started to pull his arm away, but Jeanette's grip was just too strong. He then hurriedly sat down and pushed Jeanette's face away from his arm. Unlike her arm that did not budge even a centimeter, Mark easily peeled her face away. However, it seemed that she did not want to stop and struggled. "Jeanette! Stop, bad!" Mark yelled with a slight red glow in his eyes. Hearing his voice and feeling the sudden jolt inside her mind, Jeanette froze and looked at Mark's face. Seeing his angry face, it seemed that Jeanette felt intimidated and slowly let go of Mark's arm, seemingly afraid that he would get angrier. Seeing her reaction, Mark was both confused and amazed. Confused because of her actions, but amazed with the fact that Jeanette was starting to display emotions, though it was very faint. Still, though it was faint, it affected her actions too harshly, as her mind was as blank as a brand new sheet of paper. Jeanette was mostly docile, but if something ticked her consciousness off, she tended to act erratically, pretty much like now. The same applied when Mark made her stay, and she did, at least until she saw the remaining blood on Mark's arm. Sighing, Mark looked at his arm covered with Jeanette's saliva. "I won't get infected like this, right?" Thanks to his absurd regenerative ability, the cut he made on his arm left no mark at all, and he was not able to cut himself for the third time as the girl's body finally showed some reaction. As Jeanette's saliva did not enter directly into his body, he was thinking if it would bring him bad repercussions. Mark noticed something and hurriedly picked up the small bottle that he prepared just in case that the first experiment failed. It was the bottle that contained a yellowish sticky liquid that had blood strands in it. The content of the bottle was actually saliva from one of the infected he killed earlier. He took a bottle of saliva as he wanted to experiment on it in the future. It was just that he did not expect for a good subject for the experiment to come too early. If he was not able to turn the girl into an evolver like him, Mark might have resorted in trying to turn her into a mutator, or if that also failed, he would try to turn her into something like Jeanette. That was also the reason he let Jeanette remain inside the vehicle. He also intended to get saliva from Jeanette, or maybe blood sample just in case. Comparing the contents of the bottle and the saliva on his arm, Mark frowned. The saliva on his arm obviously looked different from the content of the bottle. Jeanette's saliva looked clearer, and unlike the thick saliva in the bottle that almost looked like syrup, the viscosity of Jeanette's saliva was thinner. Seeing the comparison, Mark suddenly spit on his arm next to the thickest part of Jeanette's saliva. It might look disgusting, but Mark did not care even a tiny bit. Comparing his own saliva to Jeanette's, there was not much difference aside from the reddish color on Jeanette's saliva due to her licking his blood. Does this mean she's not one of the infected anymore? Mark mulled as he compared the three kinds of saliva in front of him. Still, he was not that convinced with the thought. He wanted to at least confirm this, but where could he find a microscope to check? Wait. Emika's uncle is a botanist, so he should have some research equipment with, right? Thinking that, he decided to ask later. Mark then wiped off the remaining blood and saliva on his arm with a rag before he helped Jeanette, who was frozen beside him, not moving even an inch, and made her sit back on the sofa. "Don't move from there again or I'll get angry," Mark said to her with a faint red glow in his eyes. Of course, he did not receive any response, but the jolt on her faint consciousness was enough to tell him that she would stay put for a while. Turning back to the unconscious girl, Mark suddenly had a conflicting thought in his mind. It was true that he only brought her because she was a perfect candidate for the experiment, since there was a chance of failing, and if any of the experiment that failed would result to the subject dying, someone who was on the verge of death was a perfect candidate. Not only that, but this girl was within the effect of growth as a child, which would also affect the chances of success on the experiment. Furthermore, she had no relatives to claim her, which would make it easier for him to put her into his custody if the experiment was a success. After all, he was not doing this for humanitarian prospects, but to test how he would be able to enhance the capabilities of the people in his group and as countermeasure in case that the worst-case scenarios happened. Just the value of the crystal could not be estimated, and he would surely not waste it on someone he would not benefit from. Now, however, he felt conflicted. As what he did, using his own blood as catalyst to induce the girl's evolution, it was something he did on the spot without thinking too much about it. This was because the situation was grave and he could not bother to think about other things. Now, however, the evolution was induced, and using his blood as catalyst, it would sure fuse with the girl's body. Now, the question here, could this girl be considered as his kin now? Scratching his head, Mark started to examine the girl's body. It might look unethical seeing a fully grown unrelated man intently observing an unconscious little girl's naked body, but he needed to do so. It was to see whether there were changes that could be observed that was happening on the girl's body. Mark was right at this moment. There were some changes that could be observed, and it was no doubt that it was something that came from his blood. The girl's wounds and bruises started to heal in a rate that could be observed with the naked eye. Even the bleeding of her genitalia had already stopped. It was still bleeding before he started his experiment. The evidence of this was the red stain left on her bottom and on the stretcher. Touching the girl's forehead, he found that her temperature was rather too high, even higher than Carlo's temperature when he was unconscious. As this could lead to the girl's brain being fried by her fever, Mark took out some anti-fever syrup and made her ingest it with his assistance. He then proceeded to take out cold water from the refrigerator and started to wipe the girl's body. It was not only to control her temperature but also to wipe off the filth on her body. If Mark was to be frank, the girl was rather quite smelly. He did not try to decrease the temperature of the air conditioning, since it not only that it might lead to a different effect, but he and Jeanette would also get affected by the sudden drop in temperature. It was unfortunate that only Jeanette was here to watch Mark do his work. He might not have a good personality and his vocabulary was limited most of the time. He also had a lot of bad aspects. One of his best qualities, however, was how he was meticulous in taking care of his people. As he already though in his mind that this girl was one of his people, he gently wiped her body, caring not to hurt her in any way. It was similar to why he would not let the others fight too dangerous battles as long as he was around doing almost everything by himself. He did not want them to get hurt in any way. After cleaning her body and her temperature waned, Mark lifted the girl off from the dirty stretcher and made her lay down on the blanket-covered sofa before covering her body with another blanket. As the little girl's condition stabilized, it was now time for Mark to get out of the vehicle. It was because he could detect some people waiting for him outside aside from Amika and Mara. Opening the door of the vehicle, who greeted his sight, was Captain Della Rosa and Irene. Behind them were a few soldiers along with the doctor that examined the girl. Even the barangay chairwoman was here, but Mark could not see the city councilor though. Roland, Nikki and her group was also missing. Probably, they already returned to where Dorothy was. As Mark went out, Irene immediately stepped forward. "How is it? You can check inside." "Well, just you all right?" Mark nonchalantly said while beckoning her to get inside the vehicle. Irene nodded and hurriedly went inside the vehicle while Mark stood by the side of the door. Captain Della Rosa also wanted to follow, but he restrained himself hearing what Mark said. Entering the vehicle, what Irene immediately though was how luxurious the vehicle was. She then turned to Jeanette warily since she was infected by their intelligence report and Mark had already admitted it before. Seeing that Jeanette was only staring at her without moving, she proceeded to check on the girl. It did not take long before Irene went out of the vehicle and stared at Mark as if she wanted to dig something from his body. Her expression made everyone concerned about the girl tense up. Mark on the other hand stared back at her without backing up. "How did you do it?" Irene finally spoke. Mark just raised his shoulders as reply to her though, as if he was going to answer that question. "How is the patient?" The doctor who examined the girl before could not help but ask Irene. It seemed that the suspense started to kill him inside. Looking at the doctor and the others waiting for her answer, Irene spoke. "The girl is already safe. She had fever but it doesn't seem to be something dangerous." Irene might not be a doctor but the girl's condition did not need some expert to deduce. What she said made the people around feel relieved, but it was obvious that there were still lingering sadness inside them. Feeling the odd fluctuations, Mark could not help but ask. "The girl is safe now but why the long faces?" To his question, Captain Della Rosa answered. "Not all the missing women and children were retrieved. When we asked the rescued women, it seems that the still missing ones had already died and were already disposed of." The dismayed face of the squad captain as he told that, revealed how much guilt he was feeling at this moment. It was the same for Irene and the other soldiers. Nevertheless, they could not do anything about the dead anymore. "By the way, Captain, I want to ask something." Mark suddenly spoke, diverting their thoughts away. "What is it? Do you think I can sell or at least trade Dominador's body to your scientists?" Mark said while looking at the body covered with vines in front of Amika. At first, he wanted to make Jeanette eat his body but considering Dominador's transformation, Mark felt repulsed to do so. Eating that mutator back in Firenze seemed to not only awaken a new consciousness on Jeanette but she also inherited his arm strength. If he made Jeanette eat Dominador's brain, there would be a chance that Jeanette would turn into a monkey-looking monster and he did not want that to happen. He wanted to observe Jeanette and wanted to see what she would end up as but he did not want to create a disgusting-looking monster just because he feed her everything he could get. "Why did you ask?" Captain Della Rosa voiced his question. "Well, I figured that your scientists might need a specimen of a successful mutator. As far as I know, your scientists only have those failed ones, right?" What Mark said pushed the squad captain into thinking. "I'm not sure about it but I'll ask." Their conversation was about to continue when a soldier came running towards them gathering their attention. "Captain! Captain!" The soldier stopped beside Captain Della Rosa. "Calm down. What is going on? Did something happen on the radio?" "Yes, Captain." The soldier tried to catch his breath. "We were scanning for radio signals when we managed to intercept one. It came from a bandwidth being used by the local police. They said that they were from Firenze and were asking for assistance." The soldier then handed a small notebook to the squad captain. Hearing the word, Firenze, Amika suddenly stood up and Mark's eyes squinted. Day 5 to 10:48 a.m. Parking area, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. The sudden news sparked a commotion among the people around while Captain Della Rosa was reading the report passed to him by his subordinate. A tight frown could be seen on the squad captain's forehead as he read further through the report. It was already surprising to hear about another large group of people establishing their own settlement, but to receive a request for assistance showed that the situation was not ideal in any way. The most pressing question, however. Captain Della Rosa turned towards his subordinates. "Who knows where this Firenze is?" However, none of the soldiers responded to his question and even looked towards the others waiting for an answer. Some even turned towards the Cat, the barangay chairwoman who was a local and the barangay police with her, but it seemed that they had no idea either. Pock. Mark slapped his forehead as he looked at these people. Nevertheless, it was not surprising. These soldiers were not from this area in the first place. They might know about the main routes but probably not some remote subdivision. It goes the same for the barangay chairwoman since it was unlikely for her to go on a place out of her jurisdiction. As for the others, it could also be understood. Firenze was located at the innermost section of clusters of several private subdivisions. Furthermore, not everyone could enter that cluster without knowing anyone from the inside. His action immediately caught the attention of Captain Della Rosa and Irene, who was just in front and beside him. "Do you know where that place is?" Irene asked. Looking at the two, Mark replied. "It's a private townhouse subdivision in Imus, Cavite. It's about more than a dozen kilometers from here following the roads. It's not surprising that Olive hadn't heard about the place since it's a new subdivision and not really a well-known one." "I see. No wonder." Captain Della Rosa propped his chin with his hand. "Anyway, what happened? Did the settlement there fell already?" Mark suddenly asked. "You know that there was a settlement there?" "Well, we do. We arrived there the other day escorting Congresswoman Lainey Villa and Police Chief Mallory along with a number of survivors. The settlement was established by a mutator within the police. We left that place yesterday noon though." You said, was? Then Firenze was overwhelmed by the infected already. Mark explained while coming into a realization. Yes, the settlement there had already fallen. It seems that they had been attacked by thousands of infected along with gigantic insects. There were also a large number of infected animals within the horde. Captain Della Rosa looked stern as he summarized the contents of the report. "You said that your group escorted Congresswoman Villa there?" Irene suddenly asked Mark. "Well yeah, what of it? I'm just surprised you did that. I'm paid to do so and it's only to escort them to that place. If they requested to accompany our group all the way here, I won't agree. I'm searching for people and bringing a large group of people here and there is just attracting for unnecessary trouble." Mark shrugged his shoulders. "Captain, what are we going to do?" Irene then turned to Captain Della Rosa and asked. "This is not a good place to discuss that." Captain Della Rosa did not dare to blindly decide and they needed to conduct a meeting for this. "By the way, where are the survivors from that place now?" Mark curiously asked. Captain Della Rosa glanced at the report on his hand and replied. "It said that they are at Città Italia now." Hearing that, Mark nodded. It was reasonable for them to stop by that area. As they left the gates of that place closed, it was unlikely for it to be infested by the infected. Nevertheless, it was just a temporary stop. The wave of infected was already coming back and it would not take long to reach that place since Firenze was not that far from Città Italia. "Then, it's better for you and your soldiers to decide what to do as soon as possible. Also, is there any results to the people I asked for?" As Mark asked his question, Captain Della Rosa turned to Alderic. "Where's Joey?" "Sir, I think he's still going around searching. Before we gathered here, I saw him and he said that the search became harder because of the gunshots. The refugees scurried around and closed the doors of the classrooms they were using. But he said that he already found 2 people along with their families. They were already escorted to our building." "I see." Captain Della Rosa then turned to Mark. "You heard him. Since the search isn't finished yet, I'll just inform you when it's done. You should also check if he found the right people. In any case, we must not delay things so we have to get going." "Okay. By the way, I'm keeping the girl all right?" Hearing that, the squad captain nodded. "You can do what you want as long as it won't be something against morals or we will be the ones to stop you. But, experimenting on a person is already against morals, right?" Captain Della Rosa felt stifled as he could not find anything to refute that. Luckily, Irene came to back him up. "It might be against morals but it's not like there's any other choice. Most of all, you managed to save her." All right. You all should go now." Mark started to shoo them away to Irene's displeasure. But it was not like they had a reason to linger either. "Ma'am Catherine, what are your plans?" Captain Della Rosa approached the barangay chairwoman and asked. "I'll tell my husband about it first and then we'll catch up with your meeting, is that fine?" Chairwoman Catherine replied. "It's fine. Just please, don't take too much time." Captain Della Rosa then turned to Mark. won't you go together with us? I still have things to do here, so all of you better go already." With that, the soldiers and the others finally dispersed, leaving the people who were initially here in the first place, the two soldiers that were guarding the parking area, Mark, Amika and Mara. It was given that Laylaps and the beetle were also here, but the two were not really people. "Then you, Mara, what do you want to do?" Well, it's given that Roland, Nikki and Dorothy will be going with us. Since that will happen, your group will disband in case that you and the other two won't go. So I'm giving you a choice now. You can come with us and join our group or not." Mara looked at Mark surprised. "Why? Actually, I'm a little odd to how much you tried just to be with your sister despite the fact that she's not the sister you used to know. So, if you join us, then I'll give the task of taking care of Janet to you since we can't really chain her now. Also Odalina, the person who was taking care of Jeanette already have a handful of work, so it's good to take that task from her. Well, actually, I'm also interested to what your intimate interaction with your infected sister would end up," Mark said while crossing his arms. "So what do you think?" Can I ask my friends about this first?" Mara was delighted about Mark's proposition. However, she wanted to ask the opinion of her friends first. She had already betrayed them and did not want to commit something that could be interpreted as such. "Well, if you say so. Actually, if you immediately accepted it, I'll probably give you a hard time even if you join us, so it's good that you didn't." Hearing that, Mara's back started to feel cold. It was good that she stuck to her conscience, or else. "Just wait for us then and let's return together. Your group should be in the military building right now." "They should be. I saw them hurrying back earlier." Mara nodded. Mark then went into the vehicle and searched for the bag where Odalina stored the change of clothes for Odette. He intended to borrow some clothes for the unconscious girl. As he could not just leave this girl, he would carry her back to the military quarters. Her condition was already stable anyway. Aside from her fever, there were no other things to worry about. Soon, he changed her clothes and lifted the girl with his left arm. He made her head lay on his shoulder and her arms around his neck. With his free hand, he grabbed Jeanette's arm and pulled her along out of the vehicle. "Mara, help me bring your sister back, is it fine?" Just pull her by her arm or hand. Without hesitation, Mara grabbed onto Jeanette's left hand. It seemed that she was really not bothered at all by the fact that her sister was already an infected. "Amika, let's go. Your mother should be worried now." "Hi, oh, scary uncle. How about this guy?" Amika pointed at Dominador's body. Mark slapped his forehead. He should have made the soldiers bring it away with them since he was going to trade it anyway. He was surely not going to feed this guy to Jeanette. As he was thinking that, Mark froze. Jeanette seemed to be not reacting by the fact that there was a dead mutator near her. "Amika, can you open a hole on the vines covering his body?" "A small one is fine. After opening the hole, close it immediately, all right?" Amika was confused by his request but still did it. He made an opening between the vines large enough to see Dominador's closed eyes. Jeanette suddenly jolted. She hurriedly looked around, but it seemed that the cause of that jolt suddenly vanished. Seeing that, Mark realized that Jeanette can locate dead bodies of mutators. However, Dominador's body was currently sealed inside the cocoon made of vines that was part of Amika's hair. It seemed that it was blocking Jeanette from sensing the dead body for some unknown reason. Amika also saw that and realized what the scary uncle wanted to do. Because of that, she made the cocoon of vines even tighter, but was not enough to crush Dominador's body inside. "Laylaps, help Amika carry that. We're going." "Rarf." Laylaps energetically responded to his order. Soon the group returned to the classroom where May and the others were waiting. Like usual, May was already waiting before he could be in their sight. She approached wanting a hug, but seeing that he was carrying a little girl, May hesitated. However, Mark pulled her close with his open arm and gave her a light hug as she wanted. Seeing that, Arvi, who was also inside the classroom, was slack-jawed. During the time he entered this room, he was observing the other people inside since he knew none of them. Still, the welcome was pleasant. Even though he and his wife looked dirty compared to these people who looked too clean as if they had just taken a bath earlier, it seemed that these people were not even bothered by it. Well, the couple still felt awkward though. The most noticeable within the group was the beautiful girl who was only staring out of the window without speaking. She was really beautiful that even his wife was in awe. He never ever thought that this beautiful girl actually had a relationship with Mark. Even Nikki and the other two members of her group who were also inside the classroom conversing with Arvi looked surprised because of the scene. On the other hand, Odalina and the others started to question him about the girl he was carrying. First, he told Odalina about the clothes he borrowed, but the loyal servant of course had no issue with it. It was then that he started to tell them what happened from the start after Roland informed him about Dorothy's disappearance. There were various emotions that rose within the crowd, but the most apparent one was the little cat girl. "Yua. Papa, you didn't bring me with you." Abigail started to sulk. Hearing the little girl call Mark Papa, choked Arvi and Nikki even more, making them look at Roland with askance. The latter, however, just shrugged his shoulders to it. After appeasing the sulking Abigail, Mark then continued his story towards to what happened to the girl but hid the fact about his experiment. Not everything should be told to everyone just like that. He made a lie about the girl managing to survive by becoming an evolver. It was not that hard to accept that, as he also evolved in the same manner. He was on the verge of death that time after fighting the berserk Odalina when he evolved. The story about the girl was about to finish when they started to hear gunshots coming from the outside. The refugees that had just began to calm down due to the incident with Dominator and his men were screaming and running away once more. "Can't I get even a little rest?" Mark sighed. Day 5 to 11:09 a.m. 4th grade building, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bakor City, Cavite. As everyone inside the elementary school grounds and Mark started to complain about taking a break himself, they heard several soldiers speaking on megaphones trying to appease the panic of the refugees. "Everyone, please do not panic and calmly return to your current dwellings. There was an ongoing buildup with the number of infected outside the school premises and we are currently thinning their numbers. I repeat, please do not panic and..." The soldiers speaking on the megaphone patiently repeated what he said several times while moving around the school. That announcement eased the panic immediately, but the refugees still went back to their dwellings as a precaution. After all, everything that happened these past days were unnerving for most people, and the current sound of guns never did anything positive to their current state of mind. Mark then sighed in relief. Though the situation was not a false alarm, at least it was not something that needed their help. It not like the military could not handle a few hundred infected and mutated infected while standing atop the walls. "Gerger, you should rest. Papa, tired." Both May and Abigail reprimanded Mark, who suddenly reacted to the sounds of guns. Realizing his blunder, Mark sighed. He did not notice because of the sequence of events, but his mental state was still in battle mode. Mark took a deep breath as he tried to make his mind calm down. "I'm fine." Mark patted the heads of the two. "Anyway, what's the plan for lunch?" Mark suddenly asked as he turned towards Odalina and Anna. "Master, we haven't really thought of it," Odalina replied with an apologetic bow. Before Mark could ask why, Melissa spoke. "Everyone here was worried about you to worry about what we are going to eat for lunch, you know that." "I see." Mark nodded. "Then, start to prepare something light but filling. We have several new people after all. Also ready some extra." Odalina and Anna nodded. However, it seems that some people disagreed. "Wait, we can't have your group handle everything, all right?" Nikki suddenly spoke. "We also have our own supplies, so let us contribute." It seemed that Nikki interjected for a good reason. Everything then proceeded smoothly after that. It seemed that not only them was thinking about lunch. It was because as Odalina and the others who went out to procure the ingredients back in their vehicle and Nikki in her group's dwelling, the people of the local government who were in charge of taking care of the refugees started to ration porridge to everyone despite the gunshots in the background. While waiting for the lunch to be prepared, Mark made his way with May and Abigail towards another room while being led by a Joey. When they were talking about lunch, Joey, The soldier tasked with searching if the people in Mark's list was among the refugees in the settlement stopped by to report that the search was done. It's unfortunate, but among your list, we only found 5 people. Joey spoke while walking. It's fine. It's already surprising that you found 5. I won't be surprised if you found no one at all. Mark replied. Actually, it should be 7, but it seems that you already took 1 and the last one was out scavenging. Hearing what Joey said, Mark nodded. He must be talking about Arvi. Arvi's wife, on the other hand, was just a tag along. In the first place, this was the first time he met Arvi's wife since Mark was not informed of his wedding. Even if Mark was informed, it was less likely for him to go anyway. Just how many people would be present at that time? He would not be able to handle that for sure. Soon they reached the room. However, it seemed that the atmosphere inside the room was not that good. Looking through the window, Mark saw 10 people, 7 adults and 3 children. Mark shook his head as he saw the situation. It was no wonder. The present inside the classroom were some of Mark's closest classmates in college and their partners. Still, the past could still affect the present after all. Not everyone had a good relationship in the past, especially when the other broke the heart of another. There was no confrontation happening, but there were 2 families inside who seemed to not have any intention of interacting to the other. On the other hand, there were the other 3 adults who seemed to have no issues and were properly interacting with everyone. The effect of the tension was still apparent in their faces though. Among these people, Mark knew 6 of them, and among the 6, 5 were his former classmates. He knew none of the children, of course. After graduation, he had been too busy jumping jobs and became a shut-in, making it unlikely for him to know the young ones inside. May also peeked through the window and her gaze locked at one of the females inside for some reason. Mark could not help but suddenly look at her. After all, May suddenly displayed cautiousness after she looked inside. Mark patted her head, which caught her off guard. "Papa, Papa, there are people outside." Mark heard a childish voice from the inside of the room. The girl was speaking to the man about the same age as Mark with tightly packed but thin-looking curly hair. This girl was probably the daughter of this classmate of his. The girl's voice immediately made everyone inside wary. After all, they were all brought here by the military without telling them anything specific. They were only told that someone was looking for them and they were to bring their families along. Knowing that they had been found out, Mark slowly walked towards the door and showed himself. Seeing him, there was a bit of silence, but when they looked to his face, "Mark!" A chorus of yells saying his name ensued. Scratching his head, Mark spoke. "Do you all have to shout that loud?" As it was confirmed that it was really Mark, they were surprised. The children and the mother of the girl who noticed Mark outside were in the lost though. Among the people inside, his former classmates were Suzanne, a woman who was a year older than Mark but never looked old due to her short height and appearance, and her husband, Loretto, who was also a timid one, but he had a lower level compared to Mark's behavior before the apocalypse. Next was Mar, the father of the girl who noticed Mark, who was close to Mark due to their hobby of playing FPS games. The other was Saime. It was her house that had been their base in their college days. The last one was Joan, the woman May was being cautious of. As for Saime's husband, Rodel, Mark also knew him, of course. Mar's wife, Julie Marie, was lost seeing how these people and her husband was behaving after they saw the man with the scary aura around him. The children were the same. The children were Lexius, Suzanne and Loretto's son, Prince, who were Saime and Rodel's son, and Monique, Mar and Julie Marie's daughter. Seeing that there were 3 families of 3 people here, he could not help but look at Joan. It seemed that this woman had not married yet, the same as him, despite the hobby this woman had. And her hobby? It was to change boyfriends, like how she changed clothes. It was not like she was a slut either. It was because none of her past boyfriends were able to push her into their beds after all. That may also be the reason why she was left by them, or why she left them. Still, why was Joan here anyway? Mark knew her since she was her classmate, but she was not in the list. Though the people in the room were obviously fatigued, the reunion of friends had gone smoothly. They all realized that it was Mark who gathered them here after he said that he made the soldiers look for them. Then, someone pouted. "Hey, why am I not included in the people you were looking for, huh? If I didn't come with Suzanne, I'll be left in the dark," Joan said as she approached coquettishly. Nevertheless, before she managed to close in to Mark, a beautiful girl blocked her path. May was told by Mark to stay put outside with Abigail since she would be a distraction to the males inside for sure, but it seemed that she was not able to hold herself back when she saw Joan approach Mark. Seeing the fairy-like appearance of May, the people inside, with the exception of the children, froze. However, May was not caring about their gazes as she stared warily at Joan. Mark slapped his forehead seeing May behave like this. Patting her head, Mark spoke. "Mayor, calm down will you? But, Gerger, it's fine all right?" May retreated but did not leave anymore and stood beside Mark while grabbing Mark's left arm with both her hands. Mark felt helpless to this, but he did not shoo her away. The scene shocked everyone and even made Joan back up as she saw the hostility in May's eyes. After that short intermission, another one started as Abigail came in calling Mark, "Papa." Following that, the explanation came forward stiffly. Mark told them why he searched for them as his close friends. However, it was not as smooth as his previous encounters. Since none of these people knew of Mark and his group's prowess, they were reluctant to leave the safety of the settlement. It seemed that it would still take them some time before they would be able to decide whether they would join Mark or not. At that moment that Mark was in the middle of convincing them, Mark suddenly jolted and turned towards a direction. "Gerger, is something wrong?" May asked as Mark suddenly stopped in the middle of his sentence. "Mayor, don't you think the gunshots are getting closer?" "I also think so." I was louder now. At that time, Joey, who left Mark to speak with his friends, barged in a hurry. "What's going on?" Mark turned towards Joey and asked. "It's at the southeast side, within the high school campus." Joey caught his breath. "Hundreds of infected are climbing up the walls." Hearing that, Mark's eyes narrowed. "Everyone, close the doors and stay here." Mark then turned to Joey. "Let's go." "Yes, sir." Together with May and Abigail, Mark followed Joey without saying too much to the others inside the room. Why does it look like that soldier was following Mark's orders? Suzanne could not help but ask, but of course, none of them could come up with a good answer. It was different if Mark was following the orders of the soldier, but it was the complete opposite. No, more importantly, why does that beautiful girl hostile to me? Joan spoke with doubt. "You know, Joan, what you're asking is not really important." Saime interjected. But Joan did not want to put down the issue. "The question now is what we are going to do." Mark said that he wants us to follow him. "I know he won't do us harm, but it's just too dangerous outside." Mar interjected in the conversation of the women. Due to Mark's sudden appearance, the stagnant atmosphere inside the room was now gone. It was easier for everyone inside to converse now, and they started to brainstorm about their decision. On the other hand, Mark brought May back into the room where the others were staying. They were currently cooking food using the utensils borrowed from the military and were using the broken wooden classroom chairs and desks as firewood. It looked like that they were gathering attention though. Not only that the girls cooking were clean and above average in appearance, the smell of the food they were cooking was too appetizing compared to the porridge distributed by the volunteers. After bringing May back, Mark together with Abigail, Laylaps, Nikki and her group with the exception of Roland's younger brother, Daniel, made their way to the area where Dominator and his men annexed before. Mark never thought that he would go back here once more after annihilating every single one of those criminals, and it was even in a short period of time. The place was not even fully cleaned up as many bodies from the previous encounter were still lying on the ground. Now, however, the threat was not people but the infected that were climbing up the walls. It was good that the walls of the high school was higher compared to normal walls built around houses, but it would not be long before these infected would be able to enter. No, considering the number of bodies near the wall, some of them had already made it inside. It was just the numbers were too small and the soldiers guarding the place. Looking at the infected, Mark frowned. He was sure that these infected were the ones that surrounded his house before. He never thought that these guys would appear here several hours after they left them in disarray. Nevertheless, it was not the time to dawdle. If these infected made it here, it was impossible that the most dangerous one would not be here. Plop. Plop. As if answering his thoughts, 2 infected were thrown over the walls towards where the soldiers were firing from. Seeing that, Mark removed the sniper rifle from his shoulder and aimed. "I won't let you escape again," Mark muttered. Day 5 to 11:42 a.m., main gates, Eastern Bacoor National High School, Bacoor City, Cavite. sh*t. What the f*ck are these infected? One of the soldiers cursed as he shot the infected that landed directly in front of him. Migs. Mind your language, the soldier who seemed to have higher rank than the soldier that cursed reprimanded. "I know, sir, but what in the world are these? They're climbing the walls and throwing infected at us." "Don't question it now. Just shoot." The soldiers lined up on the elevated area in front of the guidance room and principal's office. Some of the soldiers were positioned on the second-floor classrooms and were continuously shooting the infected outside, especially the ones climbing up the walls. With the exception of Mark, the always calm Abigail and the golden dog Laylaps, everyone else were surprised with the behavior that the infected were displaying. It was then that they saw Mark hurriedly aim towards the metal railings on top of the wall. After Mark muttered his intention, Mark intended to shoot the only infected not trying to haphazardly climb up the wall. Rather, the infected was peeking inside looking at the position of the soldiers. Bang! The sudden deafening sound overwhelmed the sounds from the assault rifles that the soldiers were using and took their attention towards Mark, who shot his sniper rifle towards the wall. The moment the soldiers turned their heads, they saw him click his tongue as his sudden shot missed, with the muscled infected jumping back away from its previous position. It seemed that it detected his killing intent despite how sudden his shot was. The soldiers on the other hand that saw Mark felt relieved. They recognized him who was the person to wipe out Dominador's faction that had been too much of a headache for them. Since he was here, they felt more assured. Furthermore, even the soldiers were in a state of panic right now. Even though they encountered mutated infected before and even nearly decimated by an unknown, they never saw infected that were able to climb up walls. More than that, it was not only one but several hundreds. Whoosh! Whoosh! Another 2 infected were thrown inside. Both infected were thrown towards Mark's direction. He prepared to dodge, but before he could do so, a red shadow and a golden flash ran past his both sides towards the direction of the 2 bodies currently falling towards him. Bam! PGSHK. Abigail and Laylaps jumped up towards the 2 infected. Abigail kicked the infected to the right, making it fly back towards the gates, while Laylaps impaled the forehead of the infected to the left with her horn before throwing the body to the side. Seeing how the 2 coordinated to protect him, Mark smiled. However, everyone else was dumbfounded. It was a mystery for them for Mark to bring a little girl with him when he was going to a place like these being attacked by the infected. Now, however, seeing how the little girl was able to kick a full-grown adult several meters away and run in fast speeds, it was no wonder he brought his daughter here. Swoosh! 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 Still, it seemed that seeing Mark made the muscled infected go haywire as it started throwing the infected in like there was no tomorrow. Furthermore, it was throwing the infected in random directions that made everyone scatter their attention away from it. Quick! Deal with the infected inside, one of the soldiers shouted as one of infected that was thrown in ran towards him after it managed to stood up. Seeing what happened, Nikki and her group joined the fray. As their group did not have guns, they only dealt with the infected inside, lessening the pressure on the soldiers, until swoosh! A large body was thrown in. Seeing that, Mark's eyes dilated, because the large body was a body of a fully bloated dozer. It was not a problem even if something was thrown in like that if it was just Mark was here, but the soldiers were not in their clearest minds and were shooting everything moving that was thrown in. Don't shoot it, Mark bellowed. He was not late and some soldiers heard him, but of course, not everyone was able to Several soldiers on the second floor aimed at the dozer without thinking. Gale, everyone return. Laylaps, pick up the others and retreat. Mark bellowed as loud as he could and also went behind the building. The two he instructed immediately followed. Abigail hurriedly ran towards her papa while Laylaps turned her body bigger and picked up Nikki and Delia, who were the nearest to the dozer, before retreating. As Mara and Maverick saw them retreating, they also followed despite not knowing the reason. Joey and several soldiers also retreated after they realized what that huge infected falling from the air was. The dozer landed on the ground and was immediately shot several times by the deranged soldiers. Boom. Crash. A sudden disgusting smell of methane and burnt flesh assaulted their noses as a loud explosion ensued, breaking the glass of the rooms in front of the gate. Even the glass of the windows on the second floor was not spared. Several soldiers were caught in the sudden explosion. Some of them were flung away while some rolled on the floor groaning in pain. On the second floor, the soldiers next to the windows were also injured, with the broken glass buffeting their bodies. The soldier nearest to the dozer had the worst injury. His clothes and skin were burned, especially on his back, as he tried to run away from the sudden explosion. The others nearby also received burns on their bodies, but their injuries were not as severe as the first one. As for Mark's group, they were all fine due to Mark's prompt orders. The remaining soldiers were dumbfounded. Hearing Mark's shout made the soldiers on the first floor not shoot it, meaning that the shot should have come from above. Damn! What are these idiots doing? They're trying to kill their own people. Maverick could not help but shout. Swoosh, swoosh. It seemed that the muscled infected outside was still not done. It continued to throw in infected over the walls and gates. Seeing that they did not have much leeway to idle, the remaining soldiers grouped themselves into two. The first group was to tend with the injured, while the second would not stop dealing with the infected. As for the soldier who caused the catastrophe, their punishment would surely be in line after they finished dealing with this mess. The soldiers were barely hanging on. As the soldiers were scattered around the settlement to deal with the sudden buildup of the infected, the number of soldiers dealing with these strange infected was not enough at all. Moreover, the sneaky muscled infected outside kept on making the situation even worse. Nikki, can your group stay here and help the soldiers? I don't know if any of you know how to use guns, but if any of you can, ask the soldiers for spare guns. They should be able to lend you guys some. Mark spoke as he shot another infected that was about to climb over the wall. Is that fine? Nikki asked. It should be. If not, then tell them that it's me who instructed you guys too. All right, but how about you? You said that my group will stay, so you will leave? That's right. We'll deal with the sneaky bastard outside throwing the infected in. If we don't go out, that guy will continue. If we go after that guy, we might be able to kill it or at least chase it away. Mark said in a serious tone. The infected neighbor of his was too troublesome to deal with. Furthermore, even though the normal infected it was throwing inside was not much of a deal, for it to throw mutated infected inside could be very dangerous. What happened just now was a great example of this. Seeing how Mark spoke like he was familiar with these strange infected, several questions popped up in their minds, but none of them stepped up to ask questions. It was not the right time to do so, and they could only nod to his instructions. As everyone came to a consensus, Mark turned towards the gate and took out a grenade. As he was holding his sniper rifle with his left hand, he held the grenade with his right and pulled the pin with his teeth. After spitting out the pin, he threw the grenade over the gate. He properly aimed a distance away, as he was aware that damaging the gate or the walls would be a good idea. Boom! The sudden explosion took the attention and raised the tension of the soldiers once more, as they were afraid that another exploding infected was thrown in, but when they saw Mark's posture and where the explosion occurred, they all felt relieved. They did not think that Mark would have grenades in his possession, and their supply of grenades for their mission had all been used up. As for Dominador's armory, it only contained guns and ammunition. It was not surprising, since if they had explosives with them, they had already eliminated the opposing factions. Mark throwing the grenade fulfilled his two goals. One was to hinder the advance of the infected outside and to stop the soldiers from shooting even for a short time. If the sneaky bastard was also affected by the explosion, it would be good, but it was not the case unfortunately, as another body was once again thrown inside after the explosion died down. Laylaps, full form. Gale, let's go. Arf. UHN. Mark bellowed, followed by the agreement of the two. With that, under the shocked eyes of everyone around, Laylap's size inflated to 3 meters. She then lowered her body and let Mark and Abigail climb onto her back with the golden spikes on her body as support. Mark readied his sniper rifle as he sat on Laylap's back with Abigail sitting atop Laylap's head. Lay. Go. Looking excited, Abigail shouted, which was followed by the 3-meter dog running and jumping over the wall out into the streets. The moment Laylaps landed, Mark aimed the sniper rifle while he looked for the muscled infected within the horde. The moment he saw it hiding behind another fully bloated dozer, Mark fired. Bang. Boom. Mark did not fire with the muscled infected as target but the dozer, which immediately caused an explosion. The muscled infected got caught up with the explosion. Nevertheless, its injuries were too light, with just a few burns and scorched marks on its body. It was because the moment Mark fired, it immediately backed up, avoiding the brunt of the explosion. This mutated infected's ability to sense threat was really top-notch. It seemed that the appearance of Laylap's 3-meter form made the muscled infected feel threat as it stopped throwing the infected around it over the walls. It jumped back several meters away and grabbed onto a movable school zone sign and threw it towards the gigantic dog's direction. Of course, Laylaps dodged the heavy sign thrown towards her. However, it seemed that the goal of the muscled infected was not to hit Laylaps but to distract her. The moment Laylaps jumped to dodge, the muscled infected started to run away. Bang! Mark tried to shoot the fleeing mutated infected, but shooting from the back of the jumping Laylaps with a fleeing target was easier to be said than to be done. Laylaps, chase it, Mark ordered. Laylaps then lunged over the infected in front of her and chased after the fleeing muscled infected. In the process, she knocked over dozens of infected, further halting their advance into the settlement. Inside, Nikki's group and the soldiers looked at the 3-meter golden dog as she and her 2 owners disappear from their sight. It was like a dream for them. They already thought that the golden-horned dog was already strange, but to see its body change into a 3-meter one was even more odd and unexpected. If not for their need to fend off the infected climbing up the walls, they would have stared at the dog with shocked expressions on their faces. Even the injured soldiers could not help but forget about the pain they were feeling due to the shock they felt. Don't waste time thinking about necessary things. The bastard that had been throwing the infected inside is being dealt with. Clear up your senses and shoot. The infected are still climbing up the walls. Joey, who led Mark and his group here, shouted. His shout woke up the other soldiers that were overwhelmed by shock over what they had just witnessed. On the other hand, Nikki and her group approached Joey to borrow weapons, which was immediately approved without hesitation. What they needed now was manpower, and they would surely not shirk to accommodate the help of a group of evolvers. While Nikki's group and the soldiers were dealing with the remaining infected outside the gates, Mark and Abigail atop Laylap's back were intently chasing after the muscled infected. Nevertheless, it was hard for the big-bodied Laylaps to catch up. The cunning infected jumped over walls and even roofs of houses onto the opposite street. It was hard for Laylaps to catch up because of her large body. Even if she could jump over houses up to 2-story ones, she could not jump over anything higher. Also, she could not jump onto roofs as her feet punches holes on the roofs, making her paws stuck. Furthermore, unlike in private subdivisions where power lines were built higher, not only the power lines in this area were built lower, it was even poorly maintained. One careless jump and Laylaps could get entangled with the wires. However, Mark could not let this infected escape. He needed to kill this infected. If possible, catch it. He needed to think of a way to do so. Day 5 to 12:01 p.m. Queens Joy Street, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Laylaps landed in the middle of the street after jumping off the roof of another house. They were already 3 blocks away from the school compound. The current street was even the one after the street where Roland's house was located. Still, they were still nowhere near to catching up with cunning fellow. Mark could not help but frown due to circumstances. In terms of speed, Laylaps was several times faster than the muscled infected, but the current location prevented her from exhibiting her full potential. The lowered power lines, trees on the yards, uneven heights of houses, the badly maintained roofing and many more factors hindered her large body from running faster. If this place was the same as Città Italia where Mark and the others first encountered Laylaps, there was a huge chance of catching up. Unfortunately, they were not. If Laylaps was to make her own size smaller, she could run with Abigail and catch up, but it increased the danger the two would face. In terms of running speed, both Laylaps and Abigail were twice as faster, and he would surely lag behind since the muscled infected seemed to run about more than half faster than his speed. In that case, there was very little that Laylaps and Abigail could do without Mark's help, and compared to the danger the two would face to confront a smart infected was not worth the risk. Tisk. Mark clicked his tongue as he watched the muscled infected run away towards the southeast. They could still continue to run away after the muscled infected as the chance of catching up was still not zero, but if it continued to run towards that direction, they would reach the former squatters' area in this place. It was former because the land was granted to the settlers years ago, but before that, it was nothing but a place for the penniless to build their homes. Once this infected reached that place, there was no way for them to catch this fellow. Not only that place had very narrow pathways that only bicycles could enter, the place would surely be brimming with infected. Mark noticed something. Laylaps, go to that building. Go around the building and hide on the back. Mark sternly said as he pointed at the 4-story concrete building to the southwest. It was a private school called Crestview Academy. Laylaps seemed to be confused to her owner's order as that direction was not the direction their target was running towards. Still, she did not dally and ran towards the direction Mark pointed at. It seemed that not only Laylaps was confused but also the little girl who was steadily sitting on her head. Because of her papa's instruction, Abigail turned her head to the back and asked, "Papa, we're not going to chase that macho uncle anymore?" Cough. Cough. Hearing what his daughter called that muscled infected, he almost burst out laughing. However, since he was sitting on the back of Laylaps who was currently running, his laugh turned into choking with his own saliva. Clearing his throat, he replied to Abigail's question. "We won't make it even if we chase that guy. Let's go on the roof of that building. I want to try something." Hearing that, Abigail looked a bit disappointed, but she did not voice anything. She knew that her papa must be thinking of doing something. Laylaps' changing course seemed to have startled the muscled infected. Its running speed slowed down as it watched the 3-meter golden dog run to a further direction. Its running became slower and slower until it came to a stop at the very entrance of the former squatter's compound. It stood onto the roof of a house at the corner of the entrance as it gazed at the golden dog that was chasing it before vanished behind the 4-story building. On the other hand, Laylaps did not take too long to reach the building. As per Mark's instructions, Laylaps jumped onto the roof of the house behind the school building. There, Laylaps reduced her size back to normal as they made their way to the rooftop. Even though Laylaps should be able to jump onto the roof in her enlarged form, it would surely reveal their current location to the muscled infected. No, not only to the muscled infected but also another person Mark had just detected. Mark noticed some faint but unusual fluctuation further ahead of the infected. As it could be something unexpected, Mark would not try to jump in without knowing anything. As that person was on the same area where the muscled infected was going, it would be likely for Mark's group to be entangled with the two if they did not do the approach correctly. Making their way to the rooftop using the emergency ladders of the school, Mark rushed into position. He looked around for a good place to put his sniper rifle on while facing the direction where the muscled infected should be. Using the scope of the sniper rifle as a telescope, he immediately found the muscled infected. However, it was not rushing towards back the school and it did not continue on running either. Mark immediately found the muscled infected because he felt the mental fluctuation of the person he detected soar. That person was now entangled with the muscled infected in a dangerous fight. Mark was not surprised. The person he detected after all was not a normal person after all. Furthermore, the person's faint mental fluctuation while having a savage emotional fluctuation gave the person's identity right away. The person was a child who was another failed mutator. In his sight, he could see the child and the muscled infected exchanging and dodging blows. Looking at the child, he was surprised as he glanced at Abigail, who had no clue what was happening. "Gail, come here. Look." As her papa called her to show something that seemed to be interesting, Abigail hurried and took a peek from the scope. "Wah! A black kitty," Abigail said while her eye was fixated at the scene several dozens of meters away. The child fighting with the muscled infected was a boy about the same age as Abigail by his body structure. His appearance, however, he looked like a large black kitten wearing clothes. His arms and face was covered in black fur while his hand that was bent like a claw had fingernails that could truly be called claws. On his head, there was 2 triangular ears while on his bottom was a long bushy tail. All in all, he looked like a bipedal cat. The mutator boy clashed with the muscled infected without fear due to the savage consciousness taking over his body. He was moving fast, though it could not be compared to Abigail's speed for sure. Looking at the fight, it seemed that the muscled infected did not regard the boy as threat at all. The muscled infected was even overpowering the black catboy. The boy swiped his claws several times while charging and lunging towards the muscled infected, but none of his attacks managed to connect. Rather, there were several times that the boy was punched, rolling several times on the roof. Finally, the boy was defeated. The boy was unable to stand anymore. Though the savage consciousness was still active, the body seemed to have lost any energy to obey the will of that consciousness. The muscled infected seemed to be gleeful for the delicious meal that suddenly appeared in front of it. It grabbed the boy's right arm and pulled the boy up. The boy tried to struggle, but he was not able to. The muscled infected moved the boy closer to its face and opened its mouth, intending to bite the boy's neck. Bang! Splat! The muscle infected's head exploded, scattering blood and brain matter in the immediate vicinity. Even the helpless child was showered with blood. As the body of the infected fell down, the grasp on the child was unfastened, making him fell hard on the roof. The flowing blood started to flow down the slope roof before dripping onto the roof gutter. Due to the existence of the mutator child, the muscled infected completely forgot about Mark's existence. Furthermore, with the distance between the muscled infected and Mark, it was no surprise that it did not notice. However, that shot did not come too easily. Mark had to wait for the muscled infected to stop moving and even moved his position several times to find an angle that would not harm the boy at all. The boy had not fully turned yet and could become a good asset. Still, he would admit it. He took advantage of the boy to take the attention of the cunning muscled infected. It was better for him to do so than have a macho stalker that could be lurking behind them without them knowing. Just the thought could make anyone shudder, even if it was before the apocalypse. Laylaps, full form again, jumped down the building and rushed towards those 2. Hearing the order, Laylap's body inflated once more before letting Mark and Abigail on her back. Laylaps jumped several meters down, denting the roof of the house where she landed with a loud sound. Then she rushed towards the direction the 2 fell. Soon, Mark reached the roof and saw the weakened child and sat in front of the boy. The boy was weak and even shivering. Clasping his arm and pinching it a little, Mark now knew why the boy lost. It seemed that it was just recently that the boy was bitten, but at the time he was bitten, he seemed to be malnourished. However, aside from the blood that splattered on the boy's clothes, the clothes seemed to be clean too. Looking at another aspect, Mark sighed in relief. The boy had not fully turned yet. As a child, Mark had a hard time accurately pinpointing the state of the boy's original consciousness. Touching the boy's head, however, made him sure that the main consciousness had not been fully snuffed yet. Still, it was close. Probably, if Mark did not see the boy in at least an hour or 2, he would finally turn into an existence the military called unknown. Unknowns were creatures that could not be determined whether they were high mutation infected or a failed mutator. It was due to the similarities of the two turning into something else that could not be determined, thus giving them the name. If this boy was to be left as it was, it would likely that he would turn into a beast-man type of unknown. Still, he looked cute as a cat though. Mark then looked at Abigail with a helpless smile. Here, don't get angry, we won't hurt you. Abigail was gently patting the head of the boy who was savagely glaring at her without any care. Furthermore, it looked like that the little girl found a wild pet on the street, forgetting the fact that she was a kitten too. Rarf. Laylaps, who already turned back to her normal size, suddenly barked as she called Mark's attention. What is it, Laylaps? Mark approached. In front of Laylaps was the splattered brain of the muscled infected. Strangely, however, there was nail-shaped stone. It was not a crystal but really looked like a pebble. The peculiar thing about the pebble though was that Mark felt some sort of energy coming from it after Mark picked it up. Is this similar to that violet crystal from the huge cat before? Mark pondered. Suddenly, Mark looked towards the southeast. He felt several people coming. It seemed that they were riding a vehicle considering the speed they were traveling. Noticing the mental fluctuation of the two people among those incoming people, Mark got a complicated look on his face. Gale, time's up for that. There are people coming. We should welcome them, I think. Mark let out a bitter smile while he grabbed the body of the weakened feral boy. Why, Papa? Abigail asked in confusion. Considering the almost 5 days they spent together, she knew that her papa was not the type of person to welcome strangers. We have to return something that is not ours after all. Mark answered, but his answer just made Abigail even more confused. With Mark in the lead, they passed over the gate that intersected the former squatters' compound, Queens Row Area A, and the Camella North subdivision where they passed through before arriving at this area several hours earlier. The three waited for a bit while Mark tightly grasped the weakened boy dangling his short arms at his side. Soon, a black van that had many dents on its exterior stopped not far away from them. 8 people went out of the vehicle, but 2 of those people were intently staring at the cab boy on Mark's arms. The 2 were a woman that looked younger than Mark and a man that seemed to be the same age. The people who came out of the car were staring warily at Mark. Some of them were holding guns while some were holding melee weapons. The woman tried to walk towards Mark, but the man held her shoulder, holding her back. Harvey, let me go. I can handle myself. The woman removed the man's hand from her shoulder. Monique, calm down. The man intently stopped her. Gesture is there. Why should I calm down? Hearing the conversation of the 2, Mark bitterly smiled. That was right. These pair of cautious man and worried woman was the parents of this feral catboy. Day 5 to 12:13 p.m., Silver Street, Camella, Springville North, Molino 3, Bacoor City, Cavite. The sun was high up as it was just several minutes past noon, but the temperature was not too hot. Strange enough, the number of infected in the area was small. There might be different reasons for this, but it worked well to the advantage of everyone here. At this moment, Mark together with Abigail and Laylaps stood in front of the parents of the boy, weakly struggling on his side. While the husband and wife, who seemed to be called Harvey and Monique respectively, were arguing, Mark watched them with bewilderment. Not wanting to watch their drama, Mark decided to speak. Ahem. Can you two continue that later? Not only we're wasting time here, but the voices of you two will alert the infected if there were some hiding around. Hearing that, the 2 stopped, but the husband continued to look at Mark with caution while the wife had her eyes look at her son before turning to Mark with a bewildered gaze. Strange enough, when the husband was about to speak, the wife stopped him and stepped forward. It seemed that the wife wanted to handle things. On the other hand, Mark sighed as he watched the careful actions of the others. Was he really that scary? He came here to return their son who surely escaped, but why were they so cautious? Surprisingly, it seemed that the woman saw through his actions. You're all waiting for us, am I right? Monique spoke with confidence, though Mark did not know where her confidence was coming from. Still, since she asked, Mark decided to honestly answer. We do. Why? Harvey interjected with bewilderment. Then, he saw Monique glaring at him, making him step back. As Harvey and the others behind were cautious towards the person holding her son, it would not be good to make them speak. What if, due to their nervousness, they spoke something unnecessary? They were here to look for her escaped son and not to seek death. Seemingly reading the actions of the woman, Mark nodded. In this group, she was the most rational, even though she was the most worried about her own son. However, before Monique could speak again, Mark started to step forward, making the crowd, with the exception of Monique, be on guard. "Monique, get behind me." Harvey spoke once more, just to receive another glare from his wife. "Shut up." Monique spoke, and then, opposite to what the others did, she started to walk forward. Soon, Mark and Monique were facing each other. "Here." Mark handed the boy without hesitation under the bewildered gazes of everyone. The mother hurriedly took the weakened boy into her embrace. The boy struggled, and even his claws partly dug into the arm of his mother. The mother did not seem to mind the pain. She was just happy to get her son back. She thought that they would lose him forever. "How did you know? And why?" Monique looked up to Mark and asked. "Just a hunch. As for why, you can say that I own that boy a little." Mark replied. Of course, he could not tell her that he could make out the similarities of their mental fluctuation to the boy, which allowed him to know that they were the boy's parents. As for owing the boy, it was not wrong. If the boy was not around, the muscled infected would surely escape, and there would be no one to distract the enemy while they made their way to a good place to snipe the infected. "Oh?" Monique stared at him with bewilderment. Her son had already turned like this, an uncontrolled savage monster. How could this man owe his son? It was then that Mark spoke. "Are you sure that you're keeping him even with that condition? He might be weak now, but once he's taken over by his mutation, he can't be saved anymore. When that happens, all of you will die." Hearing that, the pupils of Monique shrunk. Though she did not know if what Mark said was true or not, it was not impossible for that to happen. Seeing that his wife and the man were properly conversing, Harvey finally relaxed. The man in front of them felt somewhat eerie and dangerous, but to think that he was just here to return their missing son. He felt ashamed, but he decided to step forward to his wife's side. He then took a handkerchief from his pocket and gently removed the claws that dug into his wife's arm and wiped the blood off from her skin. After the claws and the blood were taken off, the small scratch marks that were visible started to close up and soon vanished. With the wounds gone, the only thing left was her smooth skin. Seeing the scene in front of him, Mark did not look surprised. He was not the only person who had regenerative abilities. Odalina's children also had it. The only difference was that his ability to regenerate his wounds was more absurd. As for this woman, her ability should be a bit higher than Odalina's children, but way below him. "You don't seem to be surprised." Monique looked at Mark with askance. "I've seen a lot, if you ask me." "Well, you should think about what I said first." Mark shrugged his shoulders. There was no reason for him to show his hands to strangers. "I don't know if what you are saying is true, but..." Monique replied as she looked at her struggling son with sadness. "About 1 hour or two, that boy will start killing you all." Mark said without emotions. He decided to inform them, but of course, that resulted to the remorse of the woman intensifying. "Is what you said true?" With sadness apparent in his eyes, Harvey asked, which Mark nodded to. At that moment, Monique realized something and she suddenly turned towards Mark. "Wait. You said that my son can't be saved anymore if he fully mutated. It means that there is a way to save my son, right?" Monique almost lunged towards Mark, which made him step back. Harvey hurriedly pulled his wife from behind. "Monique, calm down. Calm down." Mark looked at Harvey with sympathy. Having a wife like this with intelligence but extremely sharp mood swings, his situation would probably be harder than surviving alone in this apocalypse. But Monique was about to retort her husband, but she was interrupted. Bang! The men, together with Monique and Harvey, opened fire towards the incoming infected. The infected were coming from the direction where their vehicle came from. The infected probably lagged behind, but since they stopped here, the infected managed to catch up. "Harvey! Monique! Hurry up!" one of the men bellowed as he shot his revolver pistol. Seeing what was happening, Monique turned towards Mark with hurry, but he had already stepped several steps back, calling for Abigail and Laylaps to come over. "Wait. You know how to save my son, right?" Monique shouted. "This is not a good place to discuss that. Follow this dog. There's a survivor settlement not far from here managed by the military and the local government officials." Mark replied. Hearing that there was a survivor settlement nearby, not only Harvey but also the other people with them looked elated. However, why the dog? "But my son," Monique still wanted to plead, but Mark shut her down. "Just bear with your son for now. There's still more or less an hour or two before he fully mutates. As I said, hurry and follow this dog," Mark said to Monique before turning to Laylaps. Laylaps, full form. With that cue, the golden dog inflated back to her 3-meter size under the shocked faces of everyone. Mark then helped Abigail up her back, but he did not ride on her back. He then turned towards everyone behind who was staring at the 3-meter tall dog with their mouths agape. "What are you all staring like that for? Are you all following or not?" Mark felt exasperated. With everything that happened after the apocalypse, Mark had seen an over 20-meter tall tree, a house cat as large as a fully grown lion, several kinds of strange mutated infected and several kinds of mutators. What was wrong with a 3-meter tall dog for everyone to have the same reaction? If the people behind knew what he was thinking, they would surely say that he was the weird one. After hearing his shout, the group below scurried towards their van. Monique tightly hugged her son to prevent him from flailing around. Harvey jumped into the driver's seat and started to drive the vehicle after everyone came aboard. Everyone was still shocked by the appearance of the 3-meter golden dog, but they could only trust this stranger they met. He had an eerie and dangerous vibe, but it seemed that he was not bad after all. While watching their actions, Mark noticed something. The van was big and it had 3 passenger entrances. Still, with the exception of the husband and wife that went to the front seats, all the others went into the back entrance as if they were avoiding the seats directly behind the front seats. It was strange because it was unlikely not only for this group but for everyone to put baggage in the middle seats of the vehicle. It just meant that they were carrying something that was enough for those capable people to avoid. Nevertheless, it was not the time to mull about those things. "Papa, you're not coming?" Abigail asked. "Not yet. I have to get something first. You ride there on Laylaps and get back to the settlement. Is that clear?" "But, Papa, it's fine. I'll follow immediately. Papa is strong, right?" Abigail finally consented. "Laylaps, you lead this people to the settlement safely." "RARF." Laylaps replied with a deafening bark. It was now time to leave. More infected were alerted because of the gunshots and were now hurrying towards this place. With Mark's order, Laylaps started to run, leading the van away towards the settlement with Abigail waving towards her papa. The people in the van seemed to be bewildered why Mark stayed behind, but since Mark already instructed them, they drove following Laylaps. Mark waved at Abigail for a bit before jumping towards the way where they came from. Actually, it was a shorter route if Laylaps used the same route they took to get here, but the street here between Camella Springville North and Queens Row Area A was blocked by a permanently closed gate that only allowed people to pass by and not vehicles. He stopped at one of the roofs and grabbed the radio on his waist. He should inform the others about Laylaps and Abigail returning, or they might be battered with holes if they return like that. After all, who would not get scared to see a 3-meter dog running towards the settlement? He immediately called unto May and informed her of what happened and where he was right now. While on the radio, Mark could hear May talking to Odalina. After saying goodbye, he went to start his current business. As he was now alone, it would be easier for him to do some disgusting work. He was familiar with the area since this was the place where he spent more than 14 school years of his life, and thus, he was familiar where the grocery stores were located. Finding the nearest one that seemed to be ransacked already, he tried to find some jars, no matter it were plastic or glass. After eliminating several infected, he finally found an empty plastic jar used for mint candies. He brought the jar and returned to the roof where the muscled infected had fallen. Then, using a spoon, He scooped that brain matter that splattered on the roof and even scooped the remaining brain matter and fluid in the muscle-infected skull. This was really a disgusting work. If not for the need and thirst for knowledge about the infected, he would not bring this away. If there was a chance, he would try to experiment with it in the future. Mark was not sure whether it was just the brain that was important, but he just took reference to what Jeanette did before. Back at Firenze, despite the ability of the gangster having superhuman strength in his arms, Jeanette only ate the brain and nothing else, and yet, she seemed to have gained the same strength in her arms now. Still, he would not make Jeanette consume this brain. She was his very precious specimen. He did not want to turn her into a muscle hypertrophic monster either. After storing everything he could recover from the muscle-infected's brain matter and brain juice, he closed the jar and decided to leave. He was really not interested with the headless macho body on the roof and also felt disgusted to carry it around. Soon he went back to the high school area and saw that the battle was over and the soldiers were already cleaning up. However, he did not stop by and alert the cleaning soldiers and hurriedly made his way towards the elementary school to meet up with Abigail and Laylaps by jumping onto the roofs of the classrooms and buildings. Considering the distance and speed of the travel, they should have arrived already. He soon arrived and it seemed that they were safely led inside. The van was already parked beside their vehicle, but the people had not left his vehicle yet. It seemed that they were waiting for him. With them was not only Abigail and Laylaps but also May, Odalina and for some reason, Captain Della Rosa. What did he want now? Mark mused as he jumped off the roof of the building, grabbing onto the railings on the second floor and jumped down to the ground. Day 12:48 p.m. Parking area, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. While everyone else was waiting at the parking area, Odalina noticed that May was staring up at the roof of the building. Knowing the meaning of her behavior, Odalina imitated her and watched the area where May was staring at. What the two did bewildered the others and even made Captain Della Rosa think how Mark's group was filled with unfathomable people. Not long, however, at the area of the roof where May and Odalina were staring at, the man they were waiting for, Mark, appeared. After Mark scaled down the building, May hurriedly approached him. "Gerger, you took too long. We have a problem." May grumbled, but worry was apparent on her eyes. She then whispered a few things to him, making him frown as he swept his eyes at the people in front of him. Mark then patted her head. "It's fine. I'll handle it." May's eyes squinted because of his patting, but she also felt relieved at the same time. Even though her Gerger called on the radio to tell what happened, he was still late. After the call, more than half hour had already passed. She wanted to call Mark herself but decided not to. Mark also told her not to call when he was outside, as it would be a distraction if he was in the middle of something dangerous. Furthermore, due to some circumstances, things had gotten complicated now. After that, it was Abigail's turn. The little girl went towards her papa and demanded to be carried on his arms. Mark consented immediately to this, as there was no issue with a small request like this. If Mark was dirty, he might not agree, but he was careful not to dirty himself as he did his disgusting work earlier. The three approached the people waiting and Odalina immediately bowed like what most servants do. On the other hand, Laylaps sat beside Odalina like a loyal guard dog. Seeing this display, Harvey and the men on his group had their lips twitching. Monique on the other hand approached Mark carrying her son, who was still struggling in her embrace. It could be seen that her arm was stained with blood as the claws of his son dug and scratched her skin, but it seemed that it did not matter to her. Despite the pain, she still kept her tight embrace on her son, not letting little boy go. Seeing her approach, Mark signaled her to wait, stopping her from her tracks. Mark then faced Captain Della Rosa. "Why are you here?" Mark asked with a frown. Though May had already informed him of what was happening, Mark wanted to hear it from the squad captain's mouth. To Mark's tone that was not even a little bit respectful, Captain Della Rosa did not mind. "I know that my intention will be an uncouth one, so I will apologize in advance. Still, I have to ask." Captain Della Rosa looked at Mark with a stern face. "I heard from this woman that you have a way to save her son. If I'm correct, This little boy is a failed mutator. Do you really have a way to do so? I tried to ask these ladies, but they won't answer. When the black van arrived led by a 3-meter dog and a 5-year-old girl riding on the dog's back, he was alerted by the soldiers on guard. It was then that he was also informed that the women from Mark's group went to let the newcomers in. He had already heard the report about the golden dog, which gave him whole new level of shock, and when he saw the 3-meter golden dog outside the gates, he could not help but rub his eyes even though he already received the report. Since the dog belonged to Mark's group and his daughter was the one riding on the dog's back, the two were let in with the black van. After they arrived at the parking lot, however, a woman who was tightly carrying a bipedal kitten about the size of a 4-year-old took the squad captain's attention. After asking intently about the kitten that was actually a boy, the mother's tongue slipped. Their intention in this place was revealed to the squad captain. After confirming that the boy was a failed mutator, he knew the severity of the situation. It was no doubt that these people met Mark to be led back by his daughter and pet dog. The most serious thing, however, was that it seemed that Mark claimed to have a way to save this boy that turned feral. When Captain Della Rosa heard that, he immediately looked around if anyone else heard what the woman said. Fortunately, he did not bring too many soldiers with him and they were told to wait further away. He then dismissed the soldiers back to their works and stayed to wait for Mark. He tried to inquire Odalina, May and Abigail about the truth, but he did not get any answer from them. Odalina only apologized and said that his question was inappropriate for her to answer. Abigail would only stare at him without saying anything, while he could not even approach May as she would step back for every step forward he made. Mark looked at the captain with a frown before turning towards Monique. Monique's countenance paled. Because of her excitement and worry along with the vehement questioning of the soldier in front of her, her tongue slipped. When Monique saw what happened afterwards, she and her husband knew that she made a grave blunder. She wanted to approach Mark first to apologize as soon as she could, but Mark stopped her from being able to do so. Still, even though she knew that he made a wrong thing, Mark was her only hope for her child. Even if she had to kneel in apology and grovel on his feet for him to save her son, she would do it without hesitation. Mark's eyes then fell on the boy. Though weakened, the boy was trying his best to struggle free. It was strange, however, that the boy was trying to flee rather than trying to kill his mother. To Mark, however, it showed that there was still a part of the boy's consciousness preventing himself to attack Monique. Mulling over those things, Mark nodded. It seemed that this boy was worth saving after all. But Mark would surely not do it for free though. Mark then turned back to Captain Della Rosa, who was staring at him waiting for an answer. With a cold face, Mark spoke. That question could cost your life, you know that? That means you really, Captain Della Rosa's voice trailed off. That's right. If several conditions are met, I can. Mark admitted it. Hearing Mark's reply, a sudden burst of agitation enveloped the squad captain's mind that it even surprised Mark. Before Mark could say anything, Captain Della Rosa plopped on his knees in front of Mark. Hope could be seen in his eyes as he stared at Mark. I implore you. Save my son, Captain Della Rosa said as he bowed towards Mark's foot. Everyone was dumbfounded due to the sudden twist. Luckily, no one was around to see what was happening aside from the people who really should be here. If the soldiers under the squad captain were to see this, their jaws would probably fall to the ground in shock. Mark, however, frowned. As the large part of the school fell inside his detection range, he did not detect any mutator aside from Dominator earlier and even now. So, where was this son that he was talking about? As if knowing what he was thinking, Captain Della Rosa rose his body by he still knelt on the concrete parking. He then started to narrate what happened. Another squad will be arriving sooner or later and my son was one of the soldiers assigned to the squad. We received a radio transmission just now that my son had been bitten on his hand. As we knew about the existence of mutators, it was a protocol for us soldiers to not kill a person bitten immediately but observe first what changes would happen. If the soldier turned into an infected, they would be executed, but if it turned out that the soldier turned into a mutator, they will be sent back to Bay City. It would be fine for the successful mutators, but the failed ones would be tranquilized and sent back for scientific studies. It was not hard for Mark to imagine the situation. Captain Della Rosa's son became a failed mutator, and if left alone, he would become nothing but a savage beast that attacks everything on sight. So, if I could really save your son, what can you give me? Mark asked. He was not a saint. Everything should come with a price. For the little boy in Monique's embrace, he would not give them a too high price since he also owed the kid for what happened earlier, but the squad captain was different. Mark owed him nothing, and they were also the one who needed his group's help. The squad captain was stumped. Mark and his group surely had no need for weapons at the moment, and they also had no urgent need for supplies either. Well, it was not like they had much extra in their supply that he could take. Seeing this, Mark started to give suggestions. If your son met the conditions, I can save him, but I have several requests to you in exchange. I know that you don't have anything to pay me, so you can't say no to these requests, or else, not only that I won't do anything to help your son, you will also die here. Mark spoke with his eyes that were coldly staring at the squad captain. Captain Della Rosa, on the other hand, could not help but feel that his stare was peering into his heart for some reason he could not understand. The others who were watching, with the exception of May, Abigail, Odalina and Laylaps, could not help but shiver at what he said, accompanied with that look in his eyes and the dangerous vibe he was exuding. I knew it. This guy is dangerous, Harvey thought by the side. What requests? Captain Della Rosa asked. First, no one else should know that I have a way to save failed mutators. Not even your closest kin. What you know, you'll carry it to your grave. That doesn't only apply to you but also your son. Mark said sternly. Hearing that, Captain Della Rosa could only nod. Even though he was an upright soldier, he was now begging for his son. Being upright did not apply when your only family was in the brink of danger. Even if what Mark could do could benefit mankind, if it was known to the trashes in the government and military, it was likely that trouble would come to Mark and his group. Mark then turned towards Monique and her group. That also applies to all of you. Seeing Mark turn to them and say those words, everyone on Monique's group nodded like broken toys. The world was already ending, and they survived the onslaught of the infected with great difficulty. They did not want to die just because of being a blabbermouth. Turning back to the squad captain, Mark continued. Second, I want you to pledge allegiance. What? Captain Della Rosa was stumped once more. Don't worry, I won't tell you to betray your duty or something. I just want you to be around when we need support, especially once we arrive at Bay City. It was a way for Mark to gain more backing. Even though there was General Perez who was grateful for him, Mark was sure that he was tied up with his duties in the Bay City. Someone with a high rank but lower position, that the general was a good candidate and Captain Della Rosa was not a perfect one but a good example. Is that all? Captain Della Rosa sighed in relief. He thought that Mark would make him betray the general or something similar to that. There is a third one. This would be a disgusting thing, but I want you to tell your subordinates to search for the brains of mutated infected they kill if they can find stones like this one. Mark showed the general the stone Laylaps found that still reeked of blood. It was strange stone, and Mark's third was also a strange one. If that was all, the squad captain could agree to it. That's all. Also, you should stand up now. If you failed to keep any of what I just said, especially the first one, you can kiss goodbye to the world, I warn you. Mark said with an insidious stare. Though Mark did that, he knew that the soldier in front of him was not afraid at all. Why? It was because Captain Della Rosa had no plan to renege on this deal. Mark could feel how resolute his emotions was. He then turned towards Monique. It was now time to do what he needed to do and also ask for compensation. Even doctors from the government always ask for payment, how could not he? But then, when he turned around, he saw Harvey rummaging at the dashboard compartment of their vehicle. When Harvey walked out of their car once more, he was clutching a nail-sized pebble similar to what Mark had just taken out. However, Mark also noticed one thing. As Harvey was searching on the dashboard, the door of the vehicle was widely open. At the passenger seat on the second row of the car, an infected girl was idly sitting. Day 5 to 12:54 p.m. Parking area, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A. Bakor City, Kaviti. Is this the same as that one? Harvey hurriedly showed the nail-sized pebble that he had just taken to Mark. As Mark asked the soldier in front of them for something like this, it could be given to him in exchange for saving his son. He was still afraid of Mark, but considering that he had given his conditions to the soldier in advance, it meant that he was really able to save his son that had gone feral. Mark took the pebble from Harvey and nodded. He could feel the same energy coming from the new pebble, and it was no doubt that it was similar. Where did you get this? Mark asked the parents. We got it from the zombie cat that bit our son and daughter. The cat looked normal except that it had a lot of metal sticks sticking out of his body. It managed to slip into our house last night and bit my children. Out of rage, my wife bashed the cat's head too hard that the brain splattered and this stone flew towards the wall. We thought that this stone is normal at first, but Monique said that she can feel some sort of energy from it. Harvey narrated how they came to find this odd pebble while also revealing other things. Hearing the narration, Mark came to realize. It seemed that not only him but other evolvers could feel this energy. Also, Harvey had just mentioned that his son and daughter were bitten. If his son was here and became a mutator, the sister could either be dead or the infected that was currently sitting inside their vehicle. Your daughter is that infected inside the van, am I right? Mark asked once more, causing the color on the face of the husband and wife fade. They did a lot of work using makeup and even putting sunglasses on their daughter so no one would realize that she was infected, but how did this man know? Looking at the others except from the people that belonged to their group, they did not seem to realize, even though the door was wide open when Harvey was searching for that strange pebble. Hearing Mark, the others were also shocked. What they saw there was a girl about 9 or 10 years old sitting quietly. It was strange that the girl was wearing glasses, but they never thought that the girl was actually infected. Harvey and Monique might be able to fool others but not Mark. Mark could detect mental and emotional fluctuations from people, and he did not detect anyone inside the vehicle. Yet, there was someone sitting on the passenger seat. There were only two kinds of people that Mark could not detect those fluctuations from. First was dead people and the other was the infected. Since the girl was sitting there and was moving slightly, there was no doubt that she was not a corpse, which could only mean that she was an infected. Under Mark's scary stare, Harvey's weak will collapsed and he stammered as he admitted it. Why, yes. She's our daughter. We know that it's not good to bring her after she became a zombie, but please, spare her, she doesn't attack people. Mark's eyes shone after Harvey admitted that their daughter turned out to be something like Jeanette, though it was really not hard to see since the infected girl was not gagged or tied in any way but was not behaving like those bloodthirsty infected outside. Seeing how the two paled after their daughter's condition was revealed, Mark shook his head. You two shouldn't worry about your daughter. I also have an infected in the similar conditions as your daughter. If you can let me examine her later and give me this stone, I'll assure that I'll save your son. Mark beamed with a smile. This was really a good thing. Mark was having a dilemma about how he would be able to research what happened to Jeanette since there was no one to compare her to, but this family came this time with a girl with the same conditions. His enthusiasm flared inside as new knowledge about the infected could now be revealed. When Mark said that they should not worry about their daughter, they felt relieved but also surprised that their daughter was not the only one who turned to become like this after turning into an infected. Still, they could not help but hesitate when Mark asked permission to examine their daughter. What kind of examination are you talking about? Monique asked. Nothing much. I'll just compare her conditions to the infected we had. Also, I won't hide it since you will see it anyway, but the one we had started to lose the infected traits she had. Mark spoke, deciding to reveal some facts that even Captain Della Rosa's eyes dilated. The squad captain never thought that the infected Jeanette looked like that. Despite being an infected, was actually her losing her infected traits. As he looked at Mark and his group, Captain Della Rosa was being more and more mystified. He would probably believe it if Mark said that he had more knowledge about the infected that the scientists in Bay City had not discovered yet. You mean, our daughter can also be saved? Monique's eyes shone with hope, but she was bound to be disappointed as Mark shook his head. You can't say that it's save. Once a person turned into an infected, there's no going back. What Mark said disappointed the two, but at least it seemed that Mark had no ideas to desecrate the body of their daughter. The husband and wife stared at each other before Harvey nodded. Okay. We agree for you to examine our daughter. Just promise us that you won't do anything unacceptable to her. There was still a hint of hesitation, but Monique spoke her agreement. But then, they almost fell down when Mark replied. You two have to say many things, but it's not like you two can't disagree. Or else, you two will lose your son, you know that. Mark shrugged his shoulders after informing the others that Monique and Harvey had no choice but to agree to his request. There was no other leeway to it. Even Captain Della Rosa looked desperate after Mark admitted that he could do something about failed mutators, which meant that even the military or the government had no way to help. Only Mark had the way to do it, and maybe, not only in this country but in the whole world. Mark then put Abigail down beside him and spoke to Monique once more. All right. Give me your son. On Mark's cue, Monique carefully handed her son to Mark. RRRIPPPP. A ripping sound of clothes echoed, followed by a splash of blood. After Monique let go of her son, the boy immediately retaliated. Mark's arm was sliced by the boy's right-hand claw, ripping the sleeve of Mark's jacket and causing 3 gashes on his arm. Everyone was surprised to the sudden event, making Harvey and Monique's faces pale once more. Their benefactor was actually attacked by their son that he was about to treat. If this man suddenly backed out because of this, they were doomed. However, the next line of the man made them slack-jawed. My jacket is ruined again. Mark looked at the ripped left sleeve of his jacket as he grabbed both of the boy's arms with his right hand, preventing the boy from doing another attack. Looking at Mark, who was worrying about the wrong thing, even Captain Della Rosa could not find anything to say. The wound on Mark's arm was about 1 centimeter deep and about half the circumference of his arm long, with blood gushing out of it that several drops even fell on the ground. Yet, the person with the wound was even more worried about his ruined jacket. But then, under their shocked eyes, the wound's gaping wounds closed at a fast rate. Looking at this, Monique realized why Mark was not surprised about her regenerative ability. It was actually because he also had the same ability and several times higher than hers in terms of speed. Ignoring the expression of the people around, Mark spoke. May, Odell, help me with this one. Gail, you also get inside. Laylaps, guard outside the car and don't let anyone disturb us. With those words, Mark brought the boy into the MB Sprinter before May, Odelina and Abigail followed suit. After the door closed, Laylaps sat in front of the door like a guard while glancing at everyone around. Inside the vehicle, Mark made Odelina hold the boy down on the floor. Odelina covered her arms with her bone gauntlet to prevent the boy from swiping his claws toward her arms to escape. On the other hand, Mark put down his things and removed his jacket. It was quite uncomfortable as his sleeve was soaked with his blood. After he removed his jacket, May approached with a handkerchief and gently wiped the blood on his arm. Odell, hold him for a bit longer, I'll just remove a few things out of my bag. Yes, master. Mark then took out the jar containing the broken pieces of brain matter. Seeing the jar, Odelina was a bit disgusted, but she did not say anything. Mark then took out the bag where he stored the jar containing the crystals and intended to put the new jar into the same bag. It was not like that he was trying to do something with it, but he was putting anything he had strange into the same bag. Actually, the strange seed and crystal he received from Mikio was in the same bag too, in a different pocket, being safely covered with a soft cloth. Taking out another soft cloth, he put the 2 strange pebbles into the folded cloth and put it beside the jar for now. He would arrange these things later. Right now, it was urgent to deal with the savage consciousness of the boy first, as his original consciousness was getting weaker and weaker. The boy struggled, wanting to escape, but with Odelina's grasp, it was not able to. Using the same method he did with Laylaps, Mark started to work after planting his left palm on the boy's fluffy head. Intense red glow exuded from his eyes, suppressing the new consciousness. He then used his right hand that was now glowing white and nourished the original consciousness. Soon the boy stopped struggling while his thick cat fur started to regress into his body. Mark finally let go, but his face was a little pale and there were drops of blood coming out of his nose halfway the treatment. Dealing with a failed mutator was still taxing, but at least he could pull it off now more easily. It was just a bit time-consuming. May hurriedly wiped the blood coming out of his nose with worry on her face. Seeing her worry, Mark assured her that he was fine before looking at the boy who was about to wake up. Now, the boy lying on the floor was not covered with fur anymore. He really looked like a normal 4 or 5-year-old boy. Well, if not for the 2 black triangular ears on his head. It seemed that the boy also had the same side effect of mutation similar to Amika's hair and Mikio's bark-like skin. After the bleeding of his nose stopped, he scooped the boy up and went out of the vehicle. The people outside were all worried about the result. They had been waiting for more than 15 minutes already after Mark brought the boy inside the vehicle. Harvey was even pacing back and forth, not being able to stay put. Monique could not tolerate Harvey's pacing for too long and forced her husband to sit down inside their van. A few seconds later, the door opened and Mark came out carrying the boy. Seeing boy in Mark's arms, Monique's eyes started to tear up. The boy he was carrying pretty much looked normal now and a lot different from how the boy looked like 15 minutes earlier. Monique hurriedly took the boy from Mark's arms and hugged her son lovingly with a joy-filled smile. Due to her tight hug, the boy was woken up. "Mama, it hurts." Hearing that, Monique panicked. "Where does it hurt?" "Mama, your hug. Too tight." "Ah." Monique then loosened her hug on her son. Still she could not help but look at the triangular ears on and looked at Mark in askance. Then, as she stared at Mark, she also noticed how pale the color of his face was and became apologetic. Seeing her stare, Mark spoke. "I can't do anything about the ears. That's probably permanent now." Hearing that, Monique and Harvey that had just approached did not bother anymore. At least their son was back to them and was not some feral monster anymore. "Thank you very much," the husband and wife said almost at the same time. It was apparent how much they view this as a huge debt. Accepting their gratitude, Mark turned towards the squad captain who also waited for the result. "Captain, can you give these people someplace to stay, preferably near the classroom we are using now?" "There's no problem with that. I'll have it arranged immediately." After that, Captain Della Rosa personally escorted the new group towards the military quarters, leaving Mark and the others who intended to stay for a bit. However, the moment Mark turned around to the car, a flash of bright light flared, making Mark hurriedly enter and close the door of the vehicle with the others. Inside they saw the jar containing the crystals shining brightly. Day 5 to 1:22 p.m. Parking area, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Inside the vehicle, everyone's eyes were staring at the double-terminated crystal inside the jar that was exuding bright light for an unknown reason. Even the golden dog, Laylaps, was not an exception and was also staring at the jar. After the several seconds the crystal exuded that bright light, the light started to wane and brighten at a constant interval as if it was a large bulb within a series of Christmas lights. Looking at the sight, Mark was truly confused. Along the 6 years that he had observed these crystals, this was the very first time he had seen it behave this way. There were times that the largest crystal would release a blinding ray of light, and that was the time that it would produce a new marble-sized crystal with a deep purple color. However, as he thought yesterday when he saw that bright light coming out of his house, this was not the time yet for another deep purple crystal to be formed. The current ray of light too was also way weaker than yesterday. Moreover, during the formation of a new crystal, the double-terminated one would exude light continuously until the process of forming the new crystal was done. It never waned and glowed at a fixed interval like what they were seeing now. Mark cautiously approached the part of the seat where the bag containing the jar of crystal was placed. During the past years, Mark knew that the crystal was harmless, but he was now in doubt as the crystal seemed to reveal new and unknown traits after the apocalypse commenced. While Mark was approaching, however, he froze. It was because he could hear a faint buzzing sound that was also coming from the same bag. He hastened his approach and looked for the source of the buzzing sound and saw the cloth where he put the 2 nail-sized pebbles he obtained. When he took out the cloth from the bag, he felt that the two pebbles were faintly vibrating. He opened the folded cloth and took out the two pebbles, and he could feel the vibration much stronger. Furthermore, he could feel the strange energy coming from the pebbles were in disarray. "Gurgur, what is happening?" May asked in confusion. "I don't know either, but it seems that the crystal and these pebbles are, how should I say it, showing resonance," Mark said as he could feel the vibration coming from the pebbles stronger when the light on the double-terminated crystal was brighter. Not only that, Mark could feel some attraction between the crystal and the pebbles. It was like the pebbles were being pulled towards the crystal, albeit the force was weak. Mark set one of the pebbles down on the sofa. There everyone saw that the pebble was being moved towards the crystal's direction due to the vibration. It was as if the double-terminated crystal inside the jar was trying to pull the pebble towards it. Using what they had seen and what Mark felt, he drew an idea in his mind. He grabbed the pebble on the sofa once more together with the other pebble on his left hand and used his free hand to take the cover off the jar where the crystals reside in. After the jar was opened, the double-terminated crystal flew out of the jar. Since the mouth of the jar was as large as the body, the other smaller crystals that were circling around the larger one flew out together with it. The crystals floated in place about 3 feet from the floor and stayed there, but after Mark let the crystals out, he could feel the tugging on the pebbles grow stronger. Then, without hesitation, he made the pebbles on his hand touch the largest crystal. The two pebbles were absorbed by the double-terminated crystal under their surprised faces. Shhinnngg. All of them heard a ringing sound in their ears as they all turned their faces away from the crystal. The crystal exuded a very bright, blinding light. It was too bright that it felt that it would burn away their sense of sight. Mark also turned his face away and covered his eyes, but an excited expression was apparent on his face. It was because this bright light was the sign that the double-terminated crystal was forming a new crystal. 1 second, 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds passed and the bright light finally started to wane. It seemed that the duration was longer than the previous instances. Everyone looked at the floating crystals when they could finally endure the light, and there, an additional marble-sized crystal floating along with the already existing ones. The new one was obvious as it had the same appearance as the one Mark fed the dying girl earlier. Furthermore, the new crystal was also exuding a faint glow around it. When the light on the double-terminated crystal finally dimmed, they saw the double-terminated crystal eject the two pebbles. The two pebbles started to fall onto the floor, but before hitting the floor of the vehicle, the two pebbles started to disintegrate into nothingness. Not even dust or pieces were left from the pebbles, as if the two pebbles were erased from existence. Seeing the new crystal, Mark was excited. Now, they found a way to mass-produce those crystals, and it would surely lead to everyone in his group gaining abilities as evolvers. Still, Mark doubted that it would be easy. He had not confirmed yet whether there would be pebbles inside the head of every mutated infected. It was more likely that these pebbles could only be found on infected with more advanced mutations like the muscled infected. The double-terminated had already turned back to its normal state, yet Mark felt strange. It was because the new crystal was still glowing like a light bulb. Creak. 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 It was not over yet. They all heard creaking noises, making everyone move back on their seats. They immediately found the source of the creaking sound, and it was coming from that jar of brain matter that Mark had just collected earlier. The plastic jar was shaking as if the contents wanted to escape from the jar. For every second that passed, the shaking started to get more and more intense. Seeing that, Mark hurriedly stepped forward and took the jar down to the floor. He then rotated the cover of the jar off. From there, the bloody smell permeated inside the vehicle, but the shaking of the jar stopped. Surprisingly, the new crystal glowed brighter and flew towards the plastic jar. The new crystal stopped above opening of the jar and stayed there without moving. What they saw next was the brain matter inside the plastic jar started to dry up, even though it was being soaked with both brain fluid and blood. The process was slow that everyone started to feel that it was safe. They then started to surround the crystal above the jar, watching it with confusion. As they were closer, they could see that there was some sort of distortion in the air above the jar. The distortion was coming from the jar and was covering the glowing crystal. After about 10 minutes, the brain matter inside the jar fully dried up, looking like something charred despite the remaining brain juice and blood inside the jar. The glowing crystal started to dim and lost its ability to float. Mark hurriedly grabbed the crystal using the cloth on his hand, not letting it plunge into the jar filled with filth. Mark held the crystal in his cloth-covered hand in a manner that everyone was able to see it. The new marble-sized crystal had the same color as the one he gave to the dying girl. A clear crystal with a pale shade of purple. The difference about it, however, there was now a flesh-colored glowing orb at the center of the crystal. Master, it looks similar to the crystal with red glow you were keeping. Odalina could not help but remark. To the servant's remark, Mark could only nod. He also noticed the similarities. The only difference was the color of the crystal and the color of the glow inside it. While observing the new crystal, several thoughts came into Mark's mind. He remembered the purple crystal with a golden glow that entered his body 6 years ago. He never knew what the difference with it was, and that was the reason he kept the remaining crystal with red glow separate and more secure. He put inside the glass bottle and put the bottle inside the bag that was always by his side. Still, he never managed to find out what the difference was even now and what the other deep purple crystals remaining could do. This, however, was different. The pale purple crystal could help with the evolution, and he had already tested it. The question now, however, was what the difference was this crystal had now from the previous one. Mark looked at the marble-sized crystal in his hand, then towards the several crystals floating by their side. A lot of questions filled his mind. What was these crystals? What could these crystals really do? How was it linked to the mutagen that caused the current apocalypse? Why was it able to create crystals that could help evolve people? How was it able to absorb the energy within those pebbles that were found inside the brain of the mutated infected? And there was a lot more questions in his mind. Nevertheless, more than half of these questions were something that was likely to be unanswered no matter what. Regarding the new crystal, Mark had a few hunches. Jeanette came after the brains of the mutators, and she gained the ability of the mutator whose brain she had eaten. It meant that the ability or the core of the abilities the mutators had was in their brains. That was why he thought of taking this brain matter from the remains of the muscled infected due to its peculiarities. Seeing that dried up brain matter inside the plastic jar, there was no doubt that the crystal in his hand drew something from the brain matter, which resulted to the changes on the new crystal and the brain matter. Mark's head felt like it was going to explode due to his fatigue and due to too many thoughts he was having right at this moment. His already pale face that had yet to recover had started to lose even more color, and his eyes started to look lethargic. Gerger. May beside him called unto him. Mark turned to her and saw her eyes filled with worry. Gerger should stop thinking about it too much, you look too tired. Hearing that, Mark smiled and ruffled her hair. That was right, he felt tired. Since 2 o'clock in the morning, he was already awake, preparing before he started running about. Even though he was good at not sleeping for too long and was still fine, it was because he always sat in front of his computer all day long before the apocalypse. Today, however, the activities he had done since the early in the day until this moment could equal to his activities for almost 2 weeks before the outbreak. Still, he could not help but feel the thirst to know what was going on with the crystals despite his fatigue. Seeing that he was being stubborn, May frowned. She grabbed the cloth with the new crystal on Mark's hand and let move the crystal in her hand in line with the older crystals. May felt relieved as she saw the new crystal float around with the others. She then lifted the glass jar on the sofa and caught the floating crystals into the jar with Odalina's help. The two then put the jar containing the crystals back into the bag and zipped it closed. Looking at the two, Mark smiled bitterly, but his smile also contained warmness. Although what she did was a little rude, he could not get angry as she did that due to worrying about him. With that, he gave up. He would just study the crystals at a later time and in a more suitable situation. When May looked back at her Gerger, she saw that smile of his and her eyes lit up for some reason. Master, how about this? Odalina asked, pointing at the plastic jar on the floor. Can you throw it away? I don't think that it have any value anymore. Mark replied. Yes, no problem, master. Odalina then closed the plastic jar and went out of the vehicle. When Odalina returned after throwing the jar out of the settlement, she opened the vehicle and spoke. Master, do you want to eat first? Odalina's voice trailed off. Inside the vehicle, she saw May looking at her with her index finger on her lips to signal Odalina to stay quiet. Odalina then retreated outside with a smile together with Laylaps and Abigail and slowly closed the door. May was left inside the vehicle with Mark, who was now deeply sleeping on the sofa with his head on her lap. Day 5 to 2:11 p.m. 4th grade building, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Staff Sergeant Irene McCarran was currently in charge of supervising a certain area at the first floor of the building at the moment. The area consisted of 3 classrooms that were now filled with people. Even though it was filled with people, the atmosphere was more of a funeral. Doctors came in and out to the classrooms while the other soldiers were maintaining the order of the people. Inside the classrooms were the women and children that were saved from Dominador's faction. The families and relatives of the saved people were informed and were all invited here to check. Some of the people who came were happy that they finally received news about their missing relatives. However, after seeing the current state of the women and children, their happiness was doused with grief, anger and pity. Those emotions were already the lightest, as those people who did not find their missing relatives among the women and children frantically asked the soldiers. After knowing what happened to those who were missing, some fell on their knees on the spot as if their soul was taken out of their bodies. The stronger-willed ones managed to go out of the classrooms before releasing their lament elsewhere. The worst case was the old mother whose youngest daughter was missing, who fell into cardiac arrest after knowing why her missing daughter was not among the saved women and children. These events caused more work for the doctors, nurses and medics. Furthermore, that was not all. Some of the women and children received trauma because of the incident, rendering their minds unstable. A few of the women could not be talked to and were only staring at nothing, while some of the children were even afraid of being around their own fathers. Unable to endure the boiling feelings in her heart and mind, Irene stepped out of the classroom, leaving her assistant to deal with her work for a bit. She had her own worries at the moment, as she had just received the news from Captain Della Rosa that his son, who was her childhood friend, had been bitten and turned into a failed mutator. Every time that it came to her mind, her eyes started to fog. It was obvious that she had lost her childhood friend forever. As a soldier, it was expected for them to lose their close friends, comrades and even their own life in battle. Nevertheless, it would still hurt no matter how much they expected it. They were human that had feelings and not mechanical robots after all. She walked on the hallway aimlessly. She saw Captain Della Rosa, whose complexion had gotten better. After he received that news about his son, his face paled because of his loss. His current countenance made Irene somewhat surprised. Captain Della Rosa also saw her, and with that, a happy smile was plastered in his face. The squad captain knew Irene since she was a child, and she was very close to his son since childhood, that they looked like siblings. He knew how much she felt after the news of what happened to his son was relayed to her. Now, however, they had hope for his son. Though he would not tell how or who would be able to save his son, Captain Della Rosa could at least tell Irene that his son could be saved. At first, even though he begged Mark when he admitted that he could save the boy that became a failed mutator, he was still a bit skeptical. That ultimately changed after he saw how the boy turned out after the boy went under Mark's hands. Day 5 to 2:15 p.m. Main gates, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. A gray-colored armored cash transport car entered the gates. The vehicle, however, did not go towards the parking area but parked in front of the 5th grade building to the west side of the school that was being used as dwellings for the refugees. The doors opened and 5 armed men carrying guns and melee weapons went out of the vehicle. When the back doors of the vehicle opened, several boxes of food and beverages could be seen lined up inside. Several refugees saw that, but none of them tried to approach the vehicle. Though they seemed to know these people, no one wanted to try and take advantage of these armed men. One of the men separated from the others and went into one of the classrooms. The man was average in height and had a fair complexion. His face was rather good-looking. He entered the classroom with a smile. After he entered, however, his eyes dilated. There, the two people who he was going to look for, his brother and sister-in-law, was not in the classroom that they were supposed to stay in. Even their things were missing. He hurriedly left the classroom and went towards another classroom on the second floor, fearing that his girlfriend was not there either. To his relief, he found her eating a plain rice porridge that was rationed to the refugees. It was not surprising that she had not finished her food as she received it late. With the large number of refugees, not everyone could start eating at the same time. Seeing his poor girlfriend eating some low-quality food, the man broke into a bitter smile as he entered the room. When he stepped into the classroom, the woman saw him immediately and cried out, "Jason!" The woman hurriedly stood up, leaving her food on the floor, and embraced the man. "Grace, is everything all right?" Jason asked his beloved girlfriend. "It's fine. It's just there were some commotion earlier and you returned late, so I got worried." "Sorry about that. We ran into some trouble." Jason caressed the back of Grace. "By the way, where are big brother and sister-in-law?" "They were taken in by the soldiers," Grace replied. "Taken in?" Jason could not help but frown. Seeing that frown, Grace hurriedly explained. "Don't think too much. It's like this. Big brother said that several friends of his and yours came. It seemed that they have connections with the military. The female soldier that took them said that the living conditions here were too poor, so they will be relocated to the military building." Hearing that explanation made Jason feel relieved. He thought that it is something dangerous. "They left you here alone?" No," Grace shook her head and continued. "I told them that I'll stay to wait for you first because you might get worried if all of us suddenly disappeared from here." That made Jason smile as he tightened his embrace with his girlfriend before releasing her. "Want something better to eat?" Jason asked, which made Grace subconsciously nod. From his backpack, Jason took out several cans of food. It might just be processed food, but it tasted way better than plain salted porridge rationed by the local government volunteers. As the two ate, Jason asked, "Did they mention who asked brother and sister-in-law to be relocated?" "Yes. Your brother said that it was Mark and Roland." Hearing those names, Jason was surprised. Day 5 to 2:14 p.m. 6th grade building. Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A. Bacoor City, Cavite. Councillor Reynald Palabrica and Barangay Chairwoman Catherine Palabrica were talking after they had finished their lunch. "Are we really leaving this place?" Chairwoman Kat asked her husband. "It's decided." City Councillor Reynald nodded. The councillor had just returned from his meeting with the military squad captain about half an hour ago. Since it was inappropriate to discuss these things over the meal, they had just started talking about what the result of the meeting was. According to the information they got from Madame Laney's group that is currently residing in Città Italia, there was a very large horde of infected that was likely to reach this place in a day or two at most. The numbers should be several thousands, and there was no way for us to resist that number. Captain Palabrica narrated with a stern face. "What are the plans now?" Captain Della Rosa asked us to gather enough vehicles and gasoline to transport the refugees as soon as possible. His men would also do the same. After another military squad that would arrive here this afternoon reached this place and we gathered enough vehicles, we would leave tomorrow morning in the earliest and tomorrow afternoon in the latest. After that, we will join up with the survivors and police with Madame Laney in Città Italia before continuing towards Bay City. Chairwoman Kat frowned. "Tomorrow, that early?" "Yes, we can't delay, since if that horde reaches this place before we could leave, we could only pray for our survival that time." Day 5 to 2:16 p.m. 4th grade building, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Odalina had just entered the classroom with Abigail and Laylaps garnering the attention of the people inside. "Where are Boss and May?" Melissa could not help but ask, as the two were not with the three who had just returned. "Master is resting back there in the car. The young miss is taking care of Master." Odalina replied. She then noticed that there were several unfamiliar people and children within the classroom. Who are they? Hearing Odalina's question, Charmaine answered. They are Big Brother's friends and classmates. Charm was not unfamiliar with these people. They all attended the same school and it was Saime's house where they always spent their idle time after classes. The school at that time had fewer students and Mark's class that only had 16 people in their fourth year stood out. Right now, Carlo was even chatting with Saime's husband, Rodel. On the other side, Roland and Nikki were sharing stories with Arvi and his wife. Because of the new people in the classroom, it became a little noisier. Nevertheless, the atmosphere was good as if this place was detached from the outside that was filled with danger and death. ******, day 5 to 5:30 p.m. Fruto Santos Avenue, Las Piñas, Metro Manila. The place was totally devoid of people and only the infected could be seen everywhere. On the road, vehicles that crashed into one another and onto the walls were common along with the blockage of abandoned vehicles. Stomp. Stomp. Loud steps could be heard that even the infected aimlessly wandering the area were alerted. Tam. Crash. The loud steps stopped for a bit before a passenger van that was blocking the road suddenly flew 2 meters in the air and several meters away, crashing onto more vehicles before stopping. The loud sound of the impact that pushed the van away and the crash was deafening. There, the cause of the sudden crash was seen. A monster that was even taller than a single-story house. It looked like a human if not for the metal junk-like shell covering its skin. The width of its body was about 2 meters with an oversized head shaped like a frog's. Its mouth was too large that it probably made out 1/3 of its body. Under the metal junk shell, its skin was very rough and had a lot of warts like a frog's, but each wart was actually covered with metal. The color of its skin was reddish as if stating how much metal content it had in its body. The huge infected walked around seemingly looking for something. Soon, it stopped by a makeshift house made out of metal roofing. It grabbed one of the rusted metal sheets from the wall of the house. Creak. Crunch. The infected tore the metal sheet into half before shoving the torn metal sheet into its mouth. It repeated the same action over and over until it consumed all of the rusted metal sheets that composed the abandoned makeshift house. It left the remains of the house and continued walking looking for something. Without any reason, the infected monster looked far towards the south. Mark woke up gasping and covered in cold sweat.